Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime. My name is Chloe Tonis, and this week we will be discussing a ransomware negotiator pleading guilty to a scheme that involved them working with the BlackCat ransomware group. Well, he was supposed to be helping companies negotiate a lower price to pay for the ransom. He may have been doing the opposite. Ransomware, as you probably know if you've listened to this podcast, is a type of malware that encrypts systems and files, locking them away from access to normal users. This means you can't access any of your data, any of your systems. You are toast unless you communicate with the people who locked up your data and pay a ransom. They will give you a key back to decrypt your files. It's not typically recommended to pay the ransom as, well, it just encourages them to keep doing this to more people. But oftentimes, you're in a really difficult spot, and you don't have much of a choice. And they know that. Not everyone can afford to just start over from scratch, especially since some of that data is not possible to replicate again, especially if you don't have good backups, or if your backups are unfortunately also infected with the ransomware. Ransomware is one of the biggest cybersecurity threats today, and it has been for quite some time. And it makes sense. It's a very easy way for hackers to get a lot of money. Ransomware is very lucrative. Oftentimes, if large businesses are hacked, they can get millions from that single target. Or they can still get a couple thousand from some smaller targets. BlackCat is no more, at least not in its original form. They most likely disbanded and reformed into a separate group. This tends to happen. But they did have many notable attacks, including the infamous attack against Change Healthcare. That was in 2024. Back when BlackCat was still at its most active in 2023, around when they started, a ransomware negotiator named Angelo Martino abused his role in a cybersecurity incident response firm to assist them. He was working on behalf of 5 separate victims, but he was also working on behalf of the BlackCat attackers. He provided BlackCat with information about the negotiation position and the strategy of his clients without his client's knowledge or his employer's knowledge. The confidential information he provided included victim insurance policy limits and internal negotiation positions. The ransomware negotiator is typically supposed to minimize the amount of money that a company has to pay. In this case, by telling BlackCat the limits on what would be covered by their insurance, he was basically ensuring that BlackCat could maximize the payout from the victims. And the victims would still think they're getting a good deal covered by their insurance. And they may have been fine with that if it was covered by insurance, but it was still getting an unnecessary amount of money out of these victims that shouldn't have to pay that much. After all, he himself is being paid to get them a good price on this ransomware negotiation. Not only was he paid by his clients for ransomware negotiation, but BlackCat, of course, gave him a cut of their earnings from their negotiations. Martino wasn't the only person, however. He admitted to conspiring with 2 other cybersecurity professionals named Ryan Goldberg and Kevin Martin. They had also worked with BlackCat, specifically, and even deployed BlackCat ransomware to certain victims. This goes a lot deeper than what we initially thought when this story first came out, and I did a podcast episode on it a couple years ago. It's not just this one negotiator, and it's not just getting a little bit of money from BlackCat. It's more people involved that are actually infecting people with this ransomware and using strategies to maximize the amount of money they get. It's a whole fraud scheme of different threat actors acting as cyber defense professionals. One victim was extorted for $1.2 million in Bitcoin, and although these 3 didn't get all of that money, they still got a pretty sizable chunk of it split evenly throughout them. Law enforcement has seized about $10 million in assets from Martino. Not only do these assets include cryptocurrency that's related to these BlackCat negotiations, but also things like multiple vehicles. He had a food truck and a luxury boat. All 3 men pled guilty to 1 count of extortion and will be sentenced on April 30th. They face a maximum of 20 years in prison for this scheme. This is a very highly concerning crime, of course, and I'm not necessarily trying to blame the victim. This is obviously the fault of the people who said that, hey, you can trust us to give you the best deal on this ransomware negotiation. However, it is kind of concerning how much information that Martino had about the financial data and the payment processes of the victims. There should be a separation between the person doing the negotiations and the payment process for this very reason. It could create a massive conflict of interest. And if he had not known such information as the insurance information, he may not have been able to give it to BlackCat, and they could have walked out with a much better deal for the victim, not for the ransomware group. I mean, that, defeats the point, but that is the point. Anyways, separation of duties are really important in security, and some companies don't have enough staff to adequately perform them, unfortunately. It's the concept that different people should have separate jobs. One person should not be a single point of failure or in charge of too many things, because that gives them a position of too much power, where they can manipulate systems to their advantage if they become compromised, or potentially even an insider threat themselves. This is a common problem with companies that just have one IT guy who does all the networking, all the server management, all the licensing, all the setup of hardware, all the everything. If that one guy got mad, he could take down the whole company by himself. If you separate out the duties instead of that one guy, you have a networking guy, a help desk guy, security guy, infrastructure guy, developer, domain services guy, web server guy, database guy, then there's a lot less opportunity for one person to commit this massive attack that could derail everything. It's sad to think that people would really go this far, but honestly, I wouldn't be too surprised if this was happening a lot more than we think it is. It's not so uncommon for threat actors to basically recruit people on the inside to do things like deploy ransomware, so why not also bribe the negotiators to give them the better deal? And if you're a negotiator, maybe it's tempting to take a lot of extra money if it means not doing the best job for your client. After all, if insurance is paying for it, will the client even care? It still looks like you're negotiating and giving them a good price, but they don't know they're being stabbed in the back and actually given the worst price. Unfortunately, one of the easiest ways to get scammed is to be a victim of something else. Threat actors are very quick to hop on this and use it to their advantage. In this case, it was supposed to be a professional who was here to help someone who worked at a large security firm who had done this for other people. But due to a combination of bribery and maybe having a bit too much information, it ultimately hurt the companies in the end. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, and another thanks to Dark Reading, the Hacker News, and the Office of Public Affairs for information on this case. I think it brings up a lot of things that are super important to touch on in good old security world. My name is Chloe Tonis, and until next time, stay secure.